Hello everybody, my name is Luke Evans and today we're going to be going over agency. I've gotten a lot of questions, comments, arguments, debates, and most of them boil down to what does agency mean and why is it important. Specifically, a lot of my arguments or a lot of my positions are based around the idea that when you take away someone's agency, that's when you're doing something immoral. So I'm going to get into why that's a thing today. And what's so important about agency. So I'm going to start talking about the importance of agency, and then we'll get into what happens when you don't have agency. That'll be a little quick blurb at the end. So, starting off with ethics, right? Ethics is the question of how to live morally, and morality is the question of what is good and bad, right? So, to rephrase that, the question that we're asking is how do you live your life right and good? And then once we get into politics is how do groups of people live together that is right and good? And that question of right and good, right, that right versus wrong or good versus evil, that's where a lot of these questions and debates come into because those are not easy questions to answer. So for those of you who don't know or haven't seen my other videos where I go into this a lot more in depth, I am an objectivist and I follow rational egoism as my moral philosophy. So my version of rational egoism is living your life in a way that will lead you to reaching your self-actualization. So tying the philosophy of objectivism in with Maslow's hierarchy of need, where what is good is what leads you to your self-actualization. And that's a lot of psychology. I'm not going to go into it today because I've gotten into it in other videos. So the question of how do groups of people live their lives in a way that is good and right? The answer to that is it's self-evident, right? And I'm sure people hate that answer, but it's self-evident because there are whatever you do to lead yourself to that self-actualization is good and is right. And I'm sure that you're thinking that word whatever is a giant gap that has room for all kinds of different activities. And you know what? It does, because there's no prescription to activities in your life. Whatever activity you do that leads you to that self-actualization is good, because you can only reach that self-actualization by doing things that benefit yourself, and there's other videos where I go a lot more into that. So as much as people hate the answer of self-evidence and philosophy, that's going to be the answer, but it's whatever's self-evident to reach that self-actualization. Now, how do you do that, right? Self-actualization, as per the name, self-actualization is not something that can be done to you. You have to be able to think. You have to have the freedom to think and to act on those thoughts. You cannot reach self-actualization without doing both of those things. You have to have the rational mind and then the actions to drive yourself towards them. So that's obviously life is important, but liberty is the ability to think, or the freedom to think, and then the pursuit of happiness. That's where that comes from, right? So you have to be able to pursue your own interest, and in order to pursue, you have to have the agency for it. You cannot have someone stopping you and preventing you from doing the things, and that's immoral, because when you're not reaching your self-actualization, or if someone's preventing you from doing that, then they're preventing you from doing good, and I would consider that to be evil, right? So there's a phrase that there's a million ways to do something wrong, but only one way to do it right. The one right way is the way that reaches your self-actualization, and that's going to be different for every person. What works for you is not what works for me, but the principles that you live by are the same, because our brain, the physical construct of our minds and our bodies, is essentially the same, and the way the world works is essentially the same across the board. The only thing that's different is I go into philosophy, you go into plumbing or whatever, right? So that's where the differences occur, not in the principles behind them, which means not in the morality behind them. The morality and the ethics are the same. You just have a wide variety of actions you can take within that moral structure, which is great. Okay, so I have talked in other articles and videos about the concept of the brute. The brute is the large guy with a large stick in the caveman world who would go around and beat people up and take their stuff, or he was I use the word selfish, although most objectivists are going to hate me for that. But the person who is selfish rather than rational self-interest, right? And I say selfish because these are things that are not going to help him reach his rational self-interest. You can't have a community when everyone's afraid of you. But specifically for this conversation, I want to say that unless you're producing your own methods to thriving, then you cannot reach self-actualization. That is a key component in it. The ability to produce for yourself in some way is required for that self-actualization. So for the brute, the fact that he's stealing from people and beating people up to get what he wants means he's not producing. And he knows that, and it changes things in our psychology, so he's not going to be able to reach it. But let me reverse that, right? Maybe you're not the brute who's stealing from someone. Maybe you're the dependent. I don't want to get into a whole speech about welfare state or anything like that, because it's not quite what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people who are just down and out and looking to get back on their feet. That's fine. I'm not talking about people who have, a particular like physical disability and can't work or something. That's not what I'm getting into. What I'm getting into is the people who take their means of survival as a right from others, usually the government. So if your entire survival, if everything about your ability to live is based off of essentially mooching off of producers, mooching off of people who actually create it, then, there's plenty of things about stealing and theft and taxes that anarchists and all those get into that I'm not going to get into today. But at a core of yourself, even within your own bubble, you are not producing your own survival. You're not, so you're still dependent upon someone else, and that messes with your psyche. Some of the rules of thumb that I think Ayn Rand gives the metaphor of drop someone off on an island and see if they can produce for themselves. Even a computer engineer who knows nothing about has never gone camping, knows nothing about farming or hunting or anything like that, still has the rational capacity to figure out a problem and understands how the world works enough to create something of themselves, right? Or something for themselves. At a very fundamental level, you'll know to, go take a fruit off of a tree, right? So eat a fruit. You may not know which fruit, and that's dangerous, but you have the initiative and the drive and the rational capacity to figure out that this is a fruit that I can at least eat and hope it's safe and work that out. And that's an extreme example because people who don't have the productive mindset, the ability to produce as a mindset, would not do that. They would go and they would sit there and say, well, no one's brought me a fruit, so I'm not going to eat. Obviously, it's an extreme example, but that kind of mindset is what changes from self-actualization to not reaching it. So even excluding the idea of theft or pissing people off, which is a lot of what we talk about when we talk about agency, right? Or removing someone's agency or theft. That's usually what we're referring to is, oh, you're hurting someone, or in the great scheme, the long term is gonna hurt you and come back on you. But what if that doesn't? What if you have the ability to steal from people and continue to steal from people and there's never going to be ramification and you know that? Well, it's still bad because you're still not producing for your own sake. And the psychology of this, and you look into it, there's a lot of brain chemistry about it. You will not reach self-actualization. So you are not living your best self. And of course, for best self to be a term means there has to be a good and evil for you to reach that best. So hopefully that made sense. I think I covered everything. If not, please leave me a comment and a question in the description below or in the comment section below, and I will address them. I love talking about this, and I hope you have a good day.